Hey y'all, super short video today, although it might not actually be that short. Today, Netflix dropped a new image and a new footage of King Bumi, specifically his fight with Avatar Aang, which looks almost identical to the original show in some shots. But before we dive into that, let's touch on some Avatar news, and I bet you'll never guess which element Albert Kim, the showrunner of the show, says is the hardest to animate. IGN recently sat down with Albert Kim and Jabbar Raisani for a huge interview. Here are the highlights, and right off the bat, I think the creators do a great job of addressing the elephant koi in the room. Why remake the animated series into a live action to begin with? To which Kim says the approach is to change it up. And I have to agree, that's what's going to set this live action apart, by diverging and creating its own path, while still keeping to the roots of the original story. Some of those changes include the initial attack on the Southern Air Temple, the full Agni Kai between Zuko and Ozai, and more. The creators will go on to say that Aang was the most difficult character to cast, especially because they were looking for an actual 12-year-old, not a 20-year-old playing a 12-year-old. And they knew early on that Gordon Cormier was the perfect Aang. Each time they saw new actors, they always went back to Gordon until it was finally time to make the big decision. IGN also said something that was extremely significant to me, saying, quote, "When you watch the show in live action, it somehow hits you harder that they're kids. They're 12 or 15-year-olds. And I have to say that hits me pretty hard too, and it's what makes live action so impactful. Seeing animated kids go through what they did is a different thing than what a real kid is going through, especially with all that trauma that they have to go through." I mentioned it before, but all these subtle facial expressions we're seeing on the show are really doing it for me in terms of realism. Farther into the interview, Kim goes on to say this about Azula, quote, "Azula's story in the first season is a little bit of a prequel to her story in the second and third seasons, but that was another element that we thought we should see rather than just talk about." And I wonder what specifically Kim means by this. Maybe the fact that we'll see that Azula can be very demanding and constricting to those around her, to the point where she has a huge falling out with her friends. After all, we do know that both Mei and Ty Lee will appear in this version of the story. Kim would then go on to say that, quote, "It was an interesting process because what you end up finding is that there were a lot of thematic parallels, which is why I think we'll be seeing a lot of overlapping storylines. For example, the fact that the Mechanist will appear in Omashu instead of the Northern Air Temple, and it's also revealed that a lot of the Fire Nation will be shown in the first episode. So that Hawk and Ozai in the throne room and Azula with the letter all seems like it'll be happening right at the start to really establish the villains of this series." The creators also confessed that waterbending was the most difficult element to animate, and to me, it's my favorite element so far shown in all the trailers and the teasers. After that, they said air was the hardest, mostly because it can't be seen most of the time, and fire and earth were perhaps the easiest for them to produce. And again, Kim mentioned how there will be new rules around the Avatar state and how it's activated, stating, quote, "When you take a look really closely at when and how Aang can get into the Avatar state, it changes quite a bit in the original show. So we are cautious about seeing that too much in the first season. I have no actual clue what they'll be doing with the Avatar state, but I expect it will have something to do with the more vital points of interest for past avatars, like Kyoshi Island for Kyoshi or the Spirit Oasis for Avatar Karuk. The only time I would see the Avatar state being triggered without a point of interest is the second time Aang enters the Avatar state after seeing the dead body of Gyatso. But I want to hear what you all think. What rule changes do you think could happen for the Avatar state, and what would you like to see?" One part of the interview that really got my eyebrows to hike was the mention of Aang's initial drive to get to the Northern Water Tribe. Albert Kim says, quote, "We essentially give Aang this vision of what's going to happen. So instead of them going around the map aimlessly looking for adventures, there is a deliberate path to the north." So now let's move on to the big King Bumi reveal. First, let's look at this cleaner image of Bumi that we got. Clearly, this is the arena where he challenges Aang to a fight. My first impression of King Bumi wasn't very positive, and while I'm starting to be more okay with his design now that we have a better look, I still gotta say he feels a little off. I can't quite put my finger on what it is though. I think he just might be one of those characters that's really difficult to translate to live action because of how silly and goofy looking he really is. So I'm hoping the acting for the character is what really brings this through, and really sells his more endearing brand of absurdity. Speaking of which, the fight between Aang vs Bumi looks nuts. I particularly love the fact that they lifted this shot from the animated series and put it right into the live action. While some of King Bumi's movements don't look like ones from the most powerful earthbender in the world, yeah, I know what I said, I really do like how Aang's airbending and the swirling of air around him seems to lift him. All of that looks really great.
That was sick! Yo! Dude, that's ridiculous. You and the backflips, Gordon.
Utkarsh was so amazing to work with. He is like the coolest guy.
I love his commitment to the role, though.
But I want to hear from you all. What do you think of everything shown off today? Are you digging King Bumi, or are you feeling a bit iffy on him as I am? And how about the extended interview with IGN? Let me know in the comments below, and check out this video on screen if you're a fan of Avatar. I'll catch you on the next one, and as always, peace, love, and remember, be water, my friends.